think we are live. Okay. Well, good evening. It's been a while, but I'm back. Took a bit of a break there to you know, you kind of consider things a little bit. But welcome back to what we used to call Who's Terrorizing Who Tonight. And it is now a very, very different program. As you can see, there are two of us on the screen. So the new format is called Spy Squared. Okay, it wasn't my idea. If you don't like it, blame Al. But I'm really pleased to have with me tonight Al Treddenick. He's an old friend of mine from CSIS. More importantly, we share something really important, and that is we're both goaltenders. Although I will grant Al actually knows how to play goal. Who did you end up playing for? Like he wasn't semi-pro, was it?
California Seals.
California Seals. Okay, for anybody under the age of 70, the California Seals were what were first the Oakland Seals in 1967 expansion. But no, who did you end up playing? You were in Winnipeg.
Weren't you? Yeah, I was in Manitoba. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to call him Red Light. He's going to call me Five Hole because we're both goalies, which means we've had one too many pucks to the head. Anybody who deliberately plays net is probably certifiably insane. So we make a good pair. But no, I'm really pleased that Al's with me. He like me, he spent more than 3 decades in the business and a lot of experience around the world. And we're going to talk about an awful lot of stuff on this live stream. Just for your own information, we're going to limit it to an hour. So from 8 till 9 p.m. We're going to do this weekly on Thursdays to start and see where it goes. And welcome to everyone who came back. I'm so pleased that you're back. I know it was a bit of a hiatus, but I appreciate your patience with us. So I'm going to let Al talk about. Al loves talking about himself anyway. So I'm going to let Al talk about himself to give you know where I'm from. But Al's going to tell the world who he is and why it is everything he says is so important. So Al, the mic is yours.
Oh, thanks, Phil. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this new show. We hope to have it as an interactive, so that we had lots of comments and just treat it like a call-in show. But as Phil said, we're longtime friends and colleagues. Yes, we are goaltenders. Phil does know how to play goal too. So my background is I did 32 years with CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the RCMP. Most of my service has been in the counterterrorism field, but I have done some work in counterproliferation, counterintelligence through the course of that time with the government. Most of it's been the field work, operations, both domestically and abroad, and we're just here to talk about national security topics. So the first one is very topical, being the foreign interference one. And a couple of weeks ago, I had the honor to be on Phil's podcast, and we talked about an issue dealing with Saudi Arabia. But we could touch on that again if you'd like. But this is a broader issue of foreign interference. And does it really matter? Is it really a problem for Canada?
Well, okay, you look back, Al, like again, for the people that are a lot younger. So you and I started our careers in security intelligence in a very different era in the the early 1980s, right? Mm-hmm. And again, for those of people who either been under a rock or weren't around back then, when I started at Communications Security Establishment, or CSE, which is Canada's Signals Intelligence Organization, CSE was all about the Cold War. We were about 1,000 people strong at the time, and no exaggeration, I was one of 12 people that joined the organization in the early 80s. We're all university grads. 12 people out of 1,000 that did not give a rat's ass about the Soviet Union. Like, it was all about the Soviet Union all the time. Now, it was largely Soviet military. Of course, they had nukes and stuff like that, but there was also a lot of other issues with Soviet interference, et cetera, et cetera. And when you joined security intelligence, Al, so of course, so you were with the RCMP, and then you came in the old security service, then you came to CSIS in 1984. CSIS in 1984 was also, if memory serves me correct, very much a CI, a counterintelligence organization, was it not?
Oh, it was. It was. So the security service basically started off as counterintelligence, but also was doing subversion. which when CSIS was born, the legislation was passed, it was one of the threats that was listed. Right.
Section
right?
2, yeah.
2D,
Yep.
right, was the subversion section, and CSIS at the time, the RCMP, had a bigger subversion section than they did counterterrorism, because terrorism wasn't very big as far as Canada was
Right.
concerned, right?
Right.
With the exception of, say, some domestic stuff like the FLQ at its time, right? Things like that. But
and even by that point, like, the FLQ was a 60s, early 70s kind of thing. By the time
right,
CSIS came around, the FLQ, they were long gone.
that's right. And the counterintelligence side, it works closely with the counter-subversion side as foreign intelligence services, and foreign governments will use, other government agencies or that to infiltrate their enemies and try to influence policies covertly, quietly, so it doesn't look like the country X is actually influencing Canada's policies in say foreign policy or something else, right?
So Al, I mean, so for the listeners, we're talking about 2D. We're talking about the CSIS Act, which was passed 1984, and Section 2 defined the 4 main areas that CSIS was supposed to investigate. So there was foreign intelligence, foreign interference, counterterrorism, and then subversion. Now, subversion was, when I got there in 2001, subversion was almost non-existent. It was the poor country cousin of the other 3 parts of the act, right? Can you explain, based on your understanding, what the powers that be at the time, what they understood as subversion way back in the early 1980s?
So back then, it was mainly organizations that espoused changing the existing form of government that Canada had, the democratic form of government, right?
Right.
There were certain, like the Communist Party of Canada is often mentioned, Marxist-Leninist parties, the Trotskys.
Canada-Soviet Friendship Society.
A lot of friendship societies, not just the Soviets, but we had the Chinese, right? A lot of these things, right? And who were doing things covertly. And I think that's the main issue, is that the Canadian public wouldn't necessarily know that these organizations are being used by foreign governments to further their own interests inside Canada. And things never really.
I guess a lot of Canadians were kind of duped, right? Because they either didn't know what was really going on. Well, they thought, oh, this is great. We're going to meet some Soviets or some Chinese or whatever, some Mongolians or some Cubans, because we're all just one big happy family.
The infiltration of political parties went on, the infiltration of peace groups, not just in Canada, but in all the Western countries, right? Anti-NATO groups, things like that. There were individuals that were being used by the intelligence services of other countries to further their ends, using legitimate protest groups, right? And so it was a fine line to try and walk that. So it just carried on from the RCMP side into CSIS when the legislation was enacted until Air India.
Yeah.
And then when Air India
terrorism
happened,
kind of really ruled the roost.
That's right. That's when a lot of resources were shifted over to the counterterrorism field. And that was the start of the end of the counter-subversion side.
Right. So again, for those who aren't, when we say Air India, this is the attack on a Air India aircraft that originally left from Vancouver and then to Toronto, Montreal. Actually, bombs were placed on them by Canadian Sikh terrorists. One exploded at a bag, killed 2 baggage handlers in Narita Airport in Tokyo. And of course, the larger one was off the coast of Ireland in June of 1985, killing 329 people on board. And at the time, well prior to 9/11, was the single greatest act of aviation terrorism in history. And it was all planned and perpetrated here in Canada. And as Al says, you have an organization that's brand spanking new. CSIS wasn't even a year old when the Air India attack took place. And you have a service that was inherited from the old RCMP security service. So it was civilian with an awful lot of ex-Mounties, Al being one of them in the mix. And you've got these people saying, okay, we're going to look for Soviets and, like spies under the rug kind of thing. And all of a sudden, bang, no pun intended, you've got this act of terrorism, which really kind of sets the cat amongst the pigeons too, doesn't it, in terms of your resources and your training and everything else?
Well, they're 2 completely different investigations, and the way you approach these investigations between counterintelligence and counterterrorism. So it was the time. The time couldn't have been worse for CSIS, for that bombing those two bombings to have happened. The service wasn't quite developed yet in its processes, etc. But and I'm still a firm believer, and some people will argue with me on this, that if the government had have left the security service in the RCMP at the time, and then enacted the legislation, because I was part of it, the security service didn't really have a legislative mandate to do a lot of things that it was doing. It was just all done
within the RCMP, you mean?
Yes, done by ministerial directives, right? Right. So when the CSIS Act came in, there was legislation for the warrants, etc., and some many other things. So I think if the transition had have been a little more thought out, rather than bang on July 16th, that we separate it, and I think that the Air India may not have happened if the transition was a lot more.
That's interesting.
Well, that's my own opinion. And
you're sticking to it. Well, but it's also another sign, I think, of, governments often make decisions to do things. They're not always the best thought out things, right? I mean, the whole point why you had a civilian security service was as a result of the McDonald Commission, which looked into some of the activities by the security service in the RCMP in the 1970s, which were deemed to be illegal, blah, blah, blah. So the way we trust the Mounties to do it, let's get a bunch of civilians to do it instead, kind of thing. So, okay, so we have Air India in the aftermath of that. And you and I both worked on, Islamist terrorism files in the 90s, in the 2000s, and the 2010s. And it kind of became the defining feature of the security services to look at counterterrorism. Well, I just want to quote to you a little bit from the most recent CSIS public report. So this is an unclassified report, just came out last week or 2 weeks ago. And for the first time in living memory, when the report talks about threats, the very first threat they talk about, which has been counterterrorism for the better part of 20 years, this is the 20th anniversary this year of 9/11, but the CSIS public report, the very first threat they talk about is, I quote, espionage and foreign interference. And they go on quite some length. Mm-hmm. And counterterrorism doesn't make an appearance until several pages later. Just to add to this, I got an article off the Associated Press the other day, headline, Navy SEALs to shift from counterterrorism to global threats. And by global threats, they say China and Russia. So let me ask you, Al, is this really something where are we seeing like the ship of turn a little bit in terms of investigative priorities? We all know that when you do that, whenever you take resources from, say Section 2A to put them on 2C, so from foreign espionage to counterterrorism, it's kind of like robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? I mean, the other threats don't go away, because you have to still investigate them. So what do you think, if anything, does this shift in focus from the counterterrorism for the past decades to now this, what was old is new again kind of thing with counterintelligence and foreign interference? Is it going to make a big difference or not?
Well, the resources are finite. So is it going to make a big difference? I doubt it. I'm kind of like you. I think the main threat still is the terrorism angle, because that's what kills people. Yeah. But there is a lot of other activity going on now that the security services need to take a look at. And espionage, that's always been there. And the foreign interference part has always been there too. We have a long history of it, and it's mostly been foreign interference into our diaspora groups, right? Right. The Sikhs were subject to interference by the Indian government back before Air India. We've had the Chinese government have been at, especially now with the democracy activists in Hong Kong, the Uyghurs. And recently the government, the Saudi Arabian government, doing their thing against Canadians here.
So let's pick up on that second. I want to say, so Brad has said, quote, I've argued this for a long time. Canada loses between $10 and $12 billion a year to economic and industrial espionage, and hang on a second here, and US 24, the US uses 24 billion. So the US being tenfold our size and output, we are losing market shares 5 times faster. Which, I mean, I don't know where Brad got his facts from. I can assume that he's on there. Al, is it easier to sell counterterrorism to government officials than it is to sell counter foreign interference and counter espionage, because as you said, terrorism kills people. Stealing secrets, no one dies, and it's kind of like a hidden crime, if I can use that term. Do you think that the powers that be, when they and you and I know we go through this annual requirements process, right? We talk to all of our customers downtown and we say, okay, what do you want us to give you this year? And they'll list a whole bunch of them. I remember being at CSE and going to global affairs and asking them, for requirements, and they give us a list of 110 things. We say, we can't do 110 things. I mean, we're a small outfit, give us 10. And they say, okay, we get it. They come back and they give you 109. They would take, Lower Slobovia off the list. Do you think that the governments really don't have a good handle on interference and foreign espionage, and maybe that's why they don't worry about it as much, and then therefore don't task their security services with prioritizing it?
I don't know if I'd go that far. It is a concern, and just the current director mentioning the foreign interference angle.
Yeah.
But if you remember 10 years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, the director then, Dick Fadden, brought out the issue of foreign interference.
And he got shit for doing that.
The infiltration of the political parties, federal, provincial, and municipal. And so this has been going on a long time. And I think the problem in Canada is that we as Canadians, we don't see ourselves as having any natural enemies. It's kind of like, that's why our military is we never really go full bore until we absolutely have to. So for the military, Afghanistan, that was their full bore, and away they went. And that's we had
the fourth largest military in the world at the end of the Second World War, right?
And Navy, and now
we had to.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So it's always been there. It is a matter of prioritizing where you're going to put your investigative resources, right?
Okay. No, I don't disagree with you. And like I said, as you said earlier, and this is a really important point I think we have to emphasize. I mean, resources are finite. And as I've been arguing over the past couple months, you think for a nanosecond that in the post-COVID period, with a government that's $1 trillion in debt, that CSIS and the RCMP and CSE are going to get more resources? Well, then you're dreaming in Technicolor, because the money's not going to be there, right?
No, that's right.
And really smart guys like you and me are retired, right? So we're the brains of the outfit have left. So having help who's ever left over doing these jobs. But let's go back.
Don't you want more listeners, Phil? I mean, don't you?
Let's go back to Dick Fadden's comments about, like I said, about 10 years. I remember when those comments came out, and it definitely was it was a very controversial statement. He actually did point to one MP, I believe, who happened to be a Chinese Canadian, whom he basically said, this guy is, in the Chinese back pockets. And Canadians went ape shit. The government came down on the servers like a ton of bricks. How dare you accuse a serving member of parliament with being influenced by a foreign government? So do you really think things have changed that much in the past 10 years?
No, I don't think they've changed at all. In fact, they've probably gotten worse on that sort of foreign interference part. And just as we'll go back to when Dick Fadden made those comments, back around then, or at the end of the 90s, there was a joint RCMP CSIS investigation called Operation Sidewinder. And if anybody wants to look it up, that's right. If anybody wants to look it up, there's a whole bunch of references on the internet. Yeah. Now, it looked at the Chinese government, in this case, connections with organized crime, transnational crime, and crime groups in Canada, and how they used one another, or how the intelligence service, China's intelligence service, would use them to infiltrate the political parties on all levels. And again, this is the foreign interference part, where they wanted to influence policies or to crush any opposition or any critics of the regime. It's gone on for the last 10 years with an Operation Fox Hunt. It's what the Chinese call it, which is ostensibly they're targeting fugitives, as they call them. They accuse them of corruption and fraud. back in China. So they try to take law enforcement action against them in the various countries. That's happened in Canada as well, where they've tried for extradition on individuals, etc. But a lot of these individuals they're picking on are just critics of the regime.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And and it's not just China. I mean, Russia's done it.
Yep.
We're seeing it.
I'm sure the Indians are doing it as well.
We've seen. Well, that's right. So this is happening more and more. And how much has actually gone on? Operation Sidewinder was kind of shut down. Because when the analysts did the report, it was criticized for being based on conspiracy theories and unsubstantiated reporting, etc. And it went from a big report down to a little thing and then died. And now, if you take a look at what's happening now, you got to look back and go, maybe they were right. Maybe this wasn't conspiracy theories.
Let me weigh in with a comment here. Is that one of our followers, a man called Daniel Stanton, you may know, says, he says,
"Hi, Dan.
Sidewinder wasn't a good paper. I know the program well, and he ran it for 4 years." I think there are a lot of things, and there's also another former intelligence officer whose name shall remain nameless that I think was part of Sidewinder as well. So we've known about this thing for a long time. We've known that, that the Soviets and then the Russians and the Chinese have been doing their nasty stuff in the country for a long time. Let me play devil's advocate for the Trudeau government, which is something I'm very, very loath to do. Okay. We have basically hitched our economy to the Chinese wagon, as has much of the West for the past 20 or 30 years.
Right.
The two Michaels are being held incommunicado and have been for going on, I guess, 2.5 years now, I think it is. Some sham trial about them spying, whatever kind of thing. Is the government kind of damned if it does and damned if it doesn't in this case? Are they really just running scared that if they come down really hard on the Chinese in particular in this case about foreign interference and foreign espionage, that we've seen what the Chinese do, right? I mean, the Australians try to push back and the Chinese basically stop buying Australian coal, which is a certain percentage of their economy kind of thing. Is Trudeau and his cabinet just kind of shaking in their boots thinking, wow, we know this is happening, guys, and thank you very much for the intelligence, but we're kind of screwed. We can't affect the economy is already recovering slowly, if at all, because of COVID. And God, the two Michaels, if we push too hard, I mean, the Chinese could execute them tomorrow under the legislation. So is there any kind of, I don't know, saving grace for the current government to proceed kind of slowly on this or not? Or am I just being too kind to the Trudeau government?
I think you're being too kind, but maybe at the start, and who knows what's going on in the background now, right? Because I'm not privy to anything that's happening.
Yeah, neither am I. Yeah.
Right. So there could be stuff happening in the background, but right at the start, I could see the diplomatic approach and the soft power. But this has gone on way too long. And, it's time to stand up to the schoolyard bully. And
in other words,
say, we're not a big power. So they're just going to, we're kind of like a flea, right? And they'll just whatever. And we do need the Americans on side. We've got that now. But I think Canada needs to put on its big boy pants and let's be the middle power that we are and stand up and say enough's enough.
We claim to be, So in other words, if the softly approach had really been working, like I said, it's been 2.5 years since the two Michaels were taken, we would have seen a little more progress. And now we've seen nothing. There's been no indication whatsoever on the Chinese part that there's any desire to, resolve this issue. Right. And right. As long as Meng Wanzhou is being held, they're going to hold the two Michaels under these false pretenses kind of thing. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit here, Al. So I'm not sure if how many of the people listen to the podcast. JB just put it up, the link to the podcast we had on the Saudis. You spent a number of years in Riyadh. You were our liaison in Riyadh. You know the Saudis very, very well. You've worked with them. I've worked with them. They're an interesting partner to work with for a whole bunch of reasons. We might get back to that in a future podcast. But Were you surprised? So, for those who didn't listen, essentially, Al and I talked about Saudi interference here in Canada and the fact that there are allegations, not proven in court, but very strong allegations, that mere weeks after the Saudis sent a hit team to Istanbul to kill Jamal Khashoggi, who was an American Saudi citizen journalist, very critical of the Saudi regime, they sent a squad to Istanbul. They essentially killed him and dismembered him. And there's allegations that they did the same thing to Canada, to a man called Saad al-Jabri, who was a very senior Saudi intelligence official, whom Al knows very, very well. And I know to a much lesser extent. Were you at all surprised? I mean, this is obviously foreign interference. I mean, if you send a hit squad to your country to kill someone, I would call that foreign interference. Did any of that surprise you at the time when this came to light?
Well, it did. Actually, I didn't think that we'd see that sort of reaction here. I do know that the Saudis were pursuing Dr. Saad for allegations, and then of course they've gone ahead and initiated court action in Canada.
Yeah.
Well, right. So it's a number of companies that are actually run by the sovereign fund in Saudi Arabia, the chairman of which is the Crown Prince. So, and that's part of what I'm calling interference as well, because that's lawfare as far as I'm concerned, right? It's when they start using our courts and abusing our courts. Now, if they want to prove those allegations, then you bring all the witnesses from Saudi Arabia into our Canadian courtroom, as well as all the original documents that they're using in Saudi Arabia, because Canada isn't the only one where this has happened. There's been other countries where the Saudis have done the same thing. So can they prove it? Are those allegations true? Well, we don't know until we've got the witnesses here. Part of the problem is in our justice system, I would say the courts are seeing it just as, in this particular case, as just a completely commercial dispute, right? And they don't see the bigger picture of what's the geopolitical aspect of it and the lawfare part of it. And what really struck me as being, is to question if this is legitimate or not, was when the Saudi authorities kidnapped Saad al-Jabri's or detained Saad al-Jabri's children in Saudi Arabia and charged them, and then now put them in jail. And
basically blackmail.
Well, they've been trying to get al-Jabri back to Saudi Arabia for a few years now, right? And when that happened, it was kind of like, that doesn't sound like a commercial dispute to me.
Well, not only that, but okay, here's a state, Saudi Arabia, that's been a very important state since the aftermath of the Second World War. Obviously with the vast oil reserves, they were seen as an ally of the West, a stable partner in the Middle East, which is almost an oxymoron in many ways. You wouldn't have thought that a state like that would lower itself to act like a third world country when it comes to arresting people on flimsy allegations, arresting some guy's family to pressure him to come home, kind of thing. That's not what you expect from an ally and a major partner, right? So, what do you think? No,
and that's right. That was a bit shocking. I think what really struck home was the Jamal Khashoggi assassination, right? And then the Americans releasing the intelligence report, which basically pointed the finger at the Crown Prince, and it and outlined a company that was used to transport the team into Turkey. So that was a bit of a shock, because in my time there, the Saudi government was, and the Saudi security services, especially the internal service, they were great. They were a good partner. They were open. They provided us the information flow. Was basically we were a net importer of information from them. Which was.
But that was on counterterrorism, though, right, Al? And this kind of thing, this hits a little closer to the power structure, to MBS's desire to become the king, of course. So I think that, would you say that they were fine and dandy with sharing counter-terrorism with us because we had the same enemy, right? The Saudis have the same enemy we do, which is Islamist extremism. But when it comes to you're kind of hitting a little too close to the jugular vein there when you're, involving the person who's going to assume the throne at some point, and that's when they started becoming nasty. Or am I oversimplifying things here?
No, I'd say that's it basically, from my vantage point, it looks like it's an internal royal family issue. Started as that, and has kind of spread out a little bit.
And Dr. Saad's been caught up in it.
And he's been caught up in it. And it's just he was on the wrong side.
So Olivier weighs in. He says he's late to the party. Sorry with this, but what about considering some non-traditional levers like not signing off on student visa applications from the Saudi monarchy's kids? Any chance this might have an impact? Because I don't know what the numbers are now, Al, but I recall there's like well over 10,000 Saudis, mostly medical students, if memory serves me correct, studied in Canada. Mm-hmm. And they'd pay a shit ton in tuition because they'd be foreign fees, which is a lot of money for the universities. And we had to grant them those visas, right? Do you think if Canada said, you know what, you're going to play this kind of nasty game, well, you can tell your medical students to go screw themselves because they're sure as hell not going to be studying at McMaster in Toronto and University of Montreal. Do you think that would have any forbearance on the on Saudi policies and actions or not?
No, I don't think so. We're not big enough. It would hurt us more than it would hurt the Saudis
because of the money the universities get.
Exactly, and the students would just go down to the U.S.
Yeah, this is Dan made the same point. He said, problem is universities love the foreign-based tuition. It's 4 times higher. And I've already read reports here in Canadian media that because of COVID and the fact that nobody's traveling anymore, universities are really, really hurting because, what they get from my son, what Carleton gets from my son is nothing compared to what Carleton gets from the Saudis.
Look at the one in Sudbury, Laurentian University.
Yeah.
Had to file for bankruptcy.
Big time. Protection, exactly. Right?
So,
yeah.
No, absolutely. It boils down to so our national security is very much tied up in the economics.
Yeah. Which raises a really interesting question, which I was going to say for a future podcast, but let's just put it on the table right now. I've been of the opinion, and like you, I spent 3 decades in the business. I never got a very strong impression that the Canadian government, of whatever stripe, conservative, liberal, didn't matter kind of thing, at the end of the day, really cared about intelligence and really saw a lot of value in it, and it really didn't use it to its fullest effect. Would that be your experience as well, or am I just inventing this from a foggy past that's becoming foggier? By the way, everybody who's listening, tomorrow marks 6 years to the day that I retired from the security service. So happy 6th anniversary to me. But what was your experience with talking to clients about intelligence? Did you get the impression they really, really cared about it?
Well, that's hard for me to say because I was mostly on the pointy end of the stick. Right? Yeah, that's right. But I would, if I could generalize, I'd say that's probably right. They would use it for certain things. I don't think, and again, it goes back to my point of Canada doesn't perceive itself to have any natural enemies, so our national security is not big, right? It's not a big priority. And I think that's wrong. And, especially now when, given what happened in the U.S. over the last 4 years, we can't really, continue to fully rely on them. We have to start pulling our own weight. And I'm thinking more for the 2 coasts and the Arctic.
Yeah.
And I think if we were able to police the Arctic better and maybe the northern approaches, that would go over really well with the U.S. administrations,
right?
And it might be a card we can play, right? If the governments would do that, but again, it's the armed forces. So
yeah, well, and you raise a point. We've been sucking at the U.S. teat now for since the end of the Second World War, right? I mean, we rely on them for so much. I remember when I worked in SIGINT, we'd be there at CSE and we'd be all, proud of ourselves. Then you go to NSA and you think like you're just not even a drop in a bucket compared to what NSA was doing in terms of they were like 100 times our size kind of thing. There's a couple comments here. So let me just get my glass on here so I can't see a bloody thing.
You're getting old.
No shit. So one person says Canada should invest more in the Middle East. Holding more cards in the Middle East should up our bargaining power with the Saudis or the Iranians or others. Am I right? Do you think Canada really can play a more important role in the Middle East? Like, does anybody in the Middle East care if Canada were to play a more important role or not? Or do the Americans have that one sewn up?
No, I wouldn't say they've got it sewn up. We certainly are not in the top tier of important countries to the Middle East. We could be if we did it right. The interesting thing when he mentions Iran is Saudi Arabia and Iran are now have had talks.
They're talking,
right?
I saw that in the news this morning.
You know, like, I think we've missed the boat on that, on being a player. Now, on the intelligence side, there was a time when we were punching above our weight there, just like Afghanistan and in Pakistan and a few other countries, right? We were punching above our weight. I think that's no longer the case, which is unfortunate, because we could contribute to the all of Canada approach and help the other government departments, right? Exactly. Good example was Saudi Arabia. Again, we'll go back to that because I know it the best. When BlackBerry was having its trouble, they were being shut out from Saudi Arabia for certain reasons, and we were able to come in there and help Global Affairs in the Trade Commissioner's office to get the ban lifted for BlackBerry, because at that time it was one of the larger markets for BlackBerry. So, you know, we could contribute in a positive way to the all of Canada approach, all of government approach.
So we have one question coming in here, Al. Do we still sell weapons and tanks and jeeps to the Saudis? I thought we suspended that. I'm not sure. If yes, would stopping this have any impact? Or it basically, I mean, we have a lot of companies like General Dynamics, like from London, my hometown. They make all that stuff. And I think if they didn't sell to the Saudis, I think they'd be stuck with a whole bunch of Land Rovers sitting in their back 40 parking lot, just kind of sitting there rusting, right?
That's right. I haven't, unlike you, I haven't heard that they were suspended. I think those are still going ahead. They're part of the contract, right? And there was supposedly a big penalty for if we broke the contract. So.
That's right.
And you're right. It's an employment issue and stuff like that. I think one of the things, and this is getting out of the national security side, but one of the things for Canada and Canadian companies, Canadian entrepreneurs, is and I've experienced that since I've retired and have gone into the private sector, is that we're very hesitant to go into markets that we don't know, right? We're very nervous to do that. We're very Canadian. And we just like to stick to those few markets that we know really well and we can speak the same language. We've got to get out there more, because we've got great innovation, we've got great companies, and we could grow, but we've got to start promoting ourselves internationally.
There's definitely niches that we can fill that, because we have the talent and stuff. One of the comments that came in was, outside of a tragedy, how do we go about creating a proper national security culture? What steps should be taken? Well, you would argue, I mean, if Air India itself back in 85 wasn't a big enough tragedy, but I do recall, and I think I wrote about this in my most recent book, when the plane went down off the coast of Ireland, then Prime Minister Mulroney called India to express condolences over the victims, despite the fact that they were all Canadians, or the vast majority were Canadian citizens. So, I mean, if the loss of 329 people in a terrorist bombing of an aircraft isn't going to lead to a robust, intelligence culture, I mean, what the heck do it then?
No, that's right. But I mean, if you look to the future, one of the first things we could do, and this would speak to, say, espionage or in particular foreign interference, would be to enact legislation similar to what they have in the United States for the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Right. And model it after the same wording that the U.S. has, and that would start to give the security agencies some teeth to stop a lot of this foreign interference and to combat espionage. Yeah,
it's an interesting question. We have a comment here about cyber warfare. I'm going to punt on that one. I don't know if you know anything about cyber warfare. I can't spell it. It starts with an S, I think. But I don't. Do you want to touch the whole? The question basically is, wouldn't the biggest threat to Canada be China and Russia's cyber warfare? Do you want to handle that, or I mean, that's way
Well,
past my pay grade.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on cyber warfare, but it's definitely one of the ways they're doing foreign interference as well.
Yeah.
They're using the digital and cyber to. In the past, they used to use, the organizations I mentioned before.
Yep.
They used to use the newspapers. They used to put out publications, leaflets, things like that. Right. Now they're pumping out stuff on cyber, and they're using trolls and bots and pumping the disinformation. So yeah, there is an issue there that we need to address, and I think that's happening now with there's the Canadian Cyber Exchange, which is bringing organizations together, corporations together to fight that. We've got CSE has taken the cyber side. The RCMP has stood up the National Cybercrime Center for investigation of cybercrime. So we are moving to take steps in that direction. Could we do more? Likely. Again, that would cost more money and more resources.
Well, exactly. As Brad says, China is dangerous because they have access to all their private institutions as a state, where we do not. And that's true, right? They can leverage whatever. Speaking of China, just for those who didn't notice, yesterday I put out a podcast where I interviewed a Canadian Uyghur, talked to me about his experiences with Chinese government interference, pressure on him to shut his pie hole when it comes to what's happening in East Turkestan, which the Chinese call Xinjiang province. So if you haven't listened to it, check out the website. It's a really great conversation. I met this guy at Concordia a couple of years ago and had a great chat with him, and he agreed to come on the podcast. You can really get a sense as to the extent to which China, we're talking about foreign interference, the extent to which China is exerting pressure on Uyghur Canadians, on Tibetan Canadians, and as you said earlier, anybody in Canada that they see as a criminal, that basically a critic of Chinese society, right? There's no rules to this game as far as the Chinese are concerned. They don't think that sending agents across the sea to Canada is a problem, because these are first and foremost Chinese citizens, and we don't care that they're in Canada. We don't care that they're Canadian citizens. Anyone who criticizes the great Chinese regime is going to get whacked down, and that's exactly what's happening here. I remember a famous incident. I think it was McMaster a couple of years ago. A young Uyghur Canadian gave a talk, and she was shouted down by a bunch of yahoos in the back. And they were Chinese agents. They were either actual Chinese agents, or they were put up by China to disrupt the meeting and prevent this woman from talking. So, I mean, shit, if that's not foreign interference, then I have no idea what is.
No, exactly. I mean, they'll use people that are either witting agents or useful idiots, and they find a lot of them, and they fund a lot of this stuff. So, some of my RCMP friends that specialize in the money laundering, etc., will tell you, follow the money, and you'll got it. And they're absolutely right. You take some of these individuals or groups and you follow the money back, and it'll point right back to, the Chinese intelligence. And that's part of what a Foreign Agent Registration Act will do.
Yeah. So, can you talk to my listeners a little bit more on that? I'm sure many haven't heard of that particular act in the United States. So what does it actually? It means that if you are a member of a foreign government and you want to do any kind of business in the United States, you have to actually be put on this registry. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's to provide transparency for the U.S. government and by extension the U.S. people, so that they know when foreign governments are using individuals for lobbying or influence peddling, if that's what you want to call it, etc. Right? Anything they're doing in the country is done on behest of country X. So that's basically what it is.
So what would happen then if, let's say, someone from the I forget what the Chinese security, there's so many Chinese security services, I lost track. Someone from the Chinese security services infiltrates through, I don't know, a consulate, an embassy, a Chinese company, whatever kind of thing, and fails to register and is basically caught doing what he shouldn't be doing in the States. They just punt him, or what are the penalties for that kind of thing?
Well, I can't remember exactly what the penalties are. They are substantial. There are fines and there are jail terms. So, but I think the main thing is it's a deterrent to try and eliminate as much as you can the foreign influence that that an organization may end up, or a company, because these organizations or intelligence services will use companies will buy smaller companies to say in Canada that fly under the radar of the security agencies, and these companies will then acquire other companies, become bigger, etc., and nobody really knows they're actually working on behalf of Chinese intelligence or Chinese government.
And there's nothing even remotely analogous to that here in Canada right now. There's nothing similar. We have nothing similar in Canada to this foreign.
Oh, a Foreign Agent Registration Act?
Yeah. No. So,
and,
like,
and if it is, it's super secret that I've never heard of it.
Well, maybe there are things that are above your security clearance. Like, don't pretend like you're the cat's ass of all these intelligence, right? Brad says, yeah, the risk is worth it. I guess reward for them. I guess and it's kind of. I'm glad Brad raised this point, because I seem to recall that the old Chinese collection system was kind of like, we used to call it the old vacuum cleaner, because they would just suck up everything. Important, not important, it didn't matter kind of thing, because they had a gazillion people back in China that would go through this stuff, and they'd find the nuggets that were important. Whereas I think, for us in Canadian intelligence, since we're a lot smaller, we couldn't just hoover it all up because we didn't have the resources to go through it kind of thing. So maybe the Chinese think, we'll send a bunch of people over, and if 1 in 10 get caught, it's the price of doing business. We're going to exert our influence anyhow. So we'll take that risk, I guess.
Yeah, risk reward, right?
Exactly.
Plus, they're patient. I mean, there used to be the old standing joke that they'll steal our beach 1 grain of sand at a time. It's like, yeah. I mean, how do you combat that if you don't have the tools? And this Foreign Agent Registration Act would be one of the tools. I'd like to see either this current government or the next government put that in. Let's get that going and give our security agencies the tools they need.
Okay, so from based on your knowledge, then, I mean, who's lobbying? I mean, is the service lobbying for this? Is CSC? Is the RCMP lobbying for it? I mean, if people in government aren't going to push for it, if you don't got some ADM or DM somewhere in the bowels of Public Safety Canada saying, "Damn it, we need a foreign, representative law here," I mean, what would push them? Again, going back to my earlier point, to Michael's being held, the fact that our economy is in the Chinese pocket. Where's the incentive for government to enact this kind of legislation?
Well, you can't say it's targeting the Chinese government, right? It's you have to you bring that out, and it's against all countries, right?
Yeah, I suppose. A few people have also weighed in a bit on going back to the whole Saudi issue. The fact that we are talking about MBS here. We're talking about Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince. He's the one that ordered the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. He's probably the one that ordered the assassination of Dr. Saad as well. He's not going away, right? He is going to become the king of Saudi Arabia, because the current king is 149 years old, or whatever the hell he is. They're all seem to be over the age of 90, it seems. So, I mean, is this, if Canada want to take the long-term view on this, like MBS is what, 36, 37? He's really, really young. He's in his 30s. If we were smart about this from a purely diplomatic perspective, irrespective of the fact they're sending hit squads to Canada, and we want to play the long game, would we want to kind of try and co-opt him as an ally rather than piss him off? I mean, neither of us worked for Global Affairs Canada, so we don't know what goes on in the 6th floor of the Pearson building. But what kind of thought processes are going on there that he's too important of a person to really tick off, for fear that we're shut out down the road, kind of thing? Is that the kind of considerations you think are being tossed about downtown Ottawa?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's being tossed around. I think it would probably we should hedge our bets. Yes, he's in all likelihood going to be the king at some point, and will be the king for an awful long time. And he does have some ambition as far as modernizing the Saudi Arabia, and he has taken steps towards that. And
2030 project.
He's got some great ideas. Part of the problem is finding foreign investment, and perhaps if we really wanted to take a look at that, we could, with foreign affairs and the trade commissioners, and have our our own Canadian companies and that take a look and embrace Saudi Arabia for as far as investing in some of their stuff. Like for example, the Saudi Aramco, they're going to put out shares, etc. Right?
Yeah.
And they're divesting a few other state companies. So there is room for investment, which again will dovetail into the economic side of the national security, but it I think would probably give us a little more clout than to tell them to stop doing that.
Right.
You know,
but
I'll go back to the Al Jabri's kids that are being held. If MBS wants to be taken seriously, and wants these, the filings up in Ottawa or anywhere else in the world, and with world leaders, just release the kids. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense to me, other than he's being vindictive and blackmailing.
Exactly.
Blackmailing the dad.
There's no legal grounds on which to hold them. So, like, what's the pretense here?
Well, as far as we know, right? Under Saudi law, they figured out a way of doing it, and that. But to me, they're just pawns, and that's not a pro way of doing things.
No,
right?
but you talk about foreign
Bush
investment.
League.
Yeah, it is Bush League, kind of like the hockey used to play, Bush League. If memory, like, I didn't even get the Bush League. Okay, whatever's below Bush League, that's where I was playing. If memory serves me correct, the what league?
The beer league.
The beer league. Yeah, that's the only reason we played, because there was beer afterwards when you could drink in dressing rooms. I'm sure that's been banned now too. If memory serves me correct, though, in the direct aftermath of the Khashoggi killing, the slaughter, there was a real drop-off in direct foreign investment in Saudi Arabia, because when it was found out the Saudis did that, like, people got really scared, and that lasted a couple of months, maybe a year, and then the same old started happening. You had the Western powers, big companies going back to Riyadh, going back to the conferences with suitcases full of cash, reinvesting in Saudi Arabia. So they may also be playing the game that we could dick around in your country because we're so important. Eventually, you're going to come back to us anyway. So maybe like the Chinese, maybe they're not playing as long a game as the Chinese, because first of all, they're not going to steal our beaches grain at this time, because there's a gazillion grains of sand already in Saudi Arabia. But maybe they're thinking, you're going to need us at some point down the road. So we'll take the sort of the temporary hit until this whole thing blows over, and it'll be just business as usual again.
Well, you could be right. I don't think it's going to blow over. There's now the rumors with what happened in Jordan recently. That Saudi may have been involved in that, and if some recording comes out that implicates MBS, then he's in trouble.
Can't these guys find the delete button on the tape recorder?
I know, it's crazy.
Don't record. Yeah,
technology's great when it works.
Yeah, exactly. Thomas was saying, didn't the Saudis become more hawkish in the last 3 decades? They have, in fact, become a lot more hawkish. That is certainly true.
Yes.
I'm aware that we're coming up on our allotted hour. We got 7 minutes left. I'm gonna just try to draw a close to this whole thing, Al. And I'm gonna go back to the CSIS public report of 2020. How there seemed to me to be a shift in tone in terms of what the service is going to focus its resources on. Let me ask you this point blank. When you and I both retired from the service, it was very, very much not exclusively a CT organization, but it was largely a CT, counterterrorism. We still had CP investigations, counterproliferation, and CI counterintelligence, but the lion's share of the resources were in counterterrorism for reasons you and I both understand, and I think we could easily justify. Right, as I wrote in my recent book, we had to be there because we had to be there.
Absolutely.
Do you think in 2021? That a lot of the sort of organizational knowledge and experience when it comes to doing CI, counterintelligence / foreign interference investigations, has been lost? And do you think they're going to have to sort of recreate that from scratch? Or do you think there's enough of a vestige there that it won't be? Because we know that, intelligence officers are supposed to be generalists, right? You're hired for your ability to.
I don't believe in that, but yeah. Okay.
But that's what they tell us. You're a journalist. You're hired because you can recruit human sources and tell them what. Do you think there's enough, long-term memory at CSIS and CMP to pick up the ball and do those types of investigations again, or is there going to be a bit of a learning curve for them?
Quite honestly, I think it'll be a learning curve. I mean, it's just natural with the attrition rate. It's the demographics, right? All the baby boomers are starting to retire, so a lot of that institutional and corporate memory goes out the door with them.
Yeah.
Unless the organizations stay in touch with the former members and use them
Which they're not. You know that, and I know that, right?
Well, some agencies do it better than others, and then you use that corporate memory to kind of fill that gap as your new cadres get up to speed, right? And they will. I mean, we did it when we switched over after Air India. We switched from being a CI organization to CT, right?
Okay, so let's again. By the way, Andre, yes, this is a Habs jersey. Just I got it from my one game when Carey Price went down. Like, I got an emergency call to go in net, and anyhow, I
didn't know you drove a Zamboni.
Now you wonder why I have this guy on the show. What was I going to say? No. Okay, so let's assume that CI is gonna rule the roost for a little while now, and then boom, literally something boom happens. We get a significant attack. I don't care who the actor is, be it a right-wing wanker, a jihadi. I don't care. It doesn't really matter, kind of thing. And everyone's going to be running around screaming it out on Ottawa. Why weren't you monitoring this guy? So, like, think of a Michael Zahapi-Bo, right? Yeah. I mean, I've heard on good authority that this was when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, and when Zahapi-Bo killed Nathan Cirillo and then got, basically into the front door at Sutter Block. And I was there. I did the tour, and like he was literally a few meters away from a caucus meeting where Stephen Harper was there. And they threw up furniture against the door so he couldn't break through. And I've heard on good authority that his first words to Bob Paulson, who was then RCP commissioner, were, "Where the fuck were you guys? And how did someone get within 3 meters of my caucus?" kind of thing. So let's assume that something like that happens again. Do we then shift gears completely again? And, rob Peter to pay Paul again and shift from CI back to CT, or what?
Well, unfortunately, that's been the history of Canadian security services, right? It's moving to wherever the priority is the government wants. And maybe rightly so. We have to go where the masters tell us to go, right? What's the priority? However, I think this time that may not happen to the same extent. I think you'll see maybe a little bit more refining of the CT investigations and moving some of those resources back to CI. I don't think CI will rule the roost just because of the jeopardy to life, to human life. But I think it will get more resources in the end. So we may see a little more refining of the resources and focusing.
Let me ask you a last question. This is a personal preference one. You can lie if you want to. I don't care. When you were working as an intelligence officer for the service, would you have preferred working CT or CI, or did it matter?
Oh, CT. CI bored me silly.
Why?
Everything took so long.
What do you mean?
Everything took so long. Like operations, it would take months and years for something to happen. I was like, no. I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie, so CT was where it was at. CI was just. Well,
you're not going to get argument.
Some guys really like, guys and girls love that sort of cerebral work in CI and that cat and mouse game. But no, for me, and I guess maybe it was being a Mountie at heart. It was CT was it.
Also, I guess when you bleed, you still believe Surge Red, right? Is that still the case?
Yeah, probably.
Listen, guys, I hate to say this, but we are out of time for our first hour. This has been, I think, a lot of fun. We've covered a lot of topics. I think we haven't certainly exhausted the foreign interference one. I think we're probably going to be picking this up again in the near future. But what do you think, Al? Does this system work or not, or are we one and out?
No, I think this is great. There's a lot of topics to talk about. I want to get into the going dark issue, encryption. I want to get into the intelligence to evidence issue. I want to hear what your listeners have to say about it and comments. And this is a great a great forum right now. It's like talk radio, only geared to national security, and a couple of old farts talking about it.
And hopefully old farts know what they're talking about. By the way, just for your information, going dark does not mean Al's bedtime, even though we are an hour and a half past his normal bedtime. But no, Al, you know what? It's been an absolute pleasure, and we're going to be here in exactly 7 days' time. And you spoiled the surprise by giving the 19 topics we're going to talk about for the rest of the summer, but we'll pick one of them. So to everyone out there, thank you very much for being part of the inaugural, I like that word, inaugural Spy Squared. And if you don't like the word, it was Al's idea. It wasn't mine, but
that's perfect.
It's perfect. No, this is great, Al. Thanks very much. And to everyone out there, thank you for your comments. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them.
And we'll see you next week.
Absolutely. You'll see us here at the same Borealis at no time, but same Borealis at no station. By the way, I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay. I've told my listeners that, Borealis, of course, is named after the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights. You're going to tell them what ATNO stands for or not?
No.
Okay. It's a secret, guys. Your task until next Thursday is to figure out. So Al's firm is called ATNO, ATNOH. Figure out what it means, and maybe I'll cajole him into telling him what it. I know what it means, but I'm sworn to secrecy. So anyhow, guys,
people know what that means. But
thank you very, very much, guys. To everyone, more of the same.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you guys in a week. Take care.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Ciao.